De Habicht was a Polish bloke who had by this stage become a citizen of Switzerland, based in Freiburg. The De Habicht family had been among the elite in Poland, and their properties had been taken over by the communists. I'm not quite sure of the details of how he ended up coming into Switzerland. But he was secretary of the Kopeshal, I think that's the name.
Yeah, the Kopeshal, yeah.
That was the umbrella organisation of the laity prior to Vatican II. Well, he was secretary of that, coming through from his university background. Now, when I got De Habicht, and then I met his wife Charlotte De Habicht. She was an extraordinary lady. She was Dutch, I'm pretty sure, yes, Dutch or Belgian. But she, as a young girl, 19-year-old, had been part of the underground, and one of her jobs was to pick up Allied airmen that had crashed, and then she would take them part of the journey down through France and then hand them over to the next one, and so on until they got them down to Spain. She spoke very good French, as so many of those people do, and as well as great English. Well, Charlotte had sent, or as was the habit, sent a postcard onto the parish priest of the next place that she'd be arriving at. Where it was, "I'll be coming into town with a couple of parcels for you. Be ready to meet me at the station," or something. By that stage, that parish priest was already, I think, may have been arrested. So the SS had got that card, waited for that train, and then went through it until they saw a woman with two men.
Mm.
And she was arrested. She ended up in Ravensbrück prison outside Berlin. And she had some pretty horrible experiences there. They were working on a farm, and she said it was the one thing that kept her, saved her life, really. She developed into had huge shoulders on. She did a lot of tree felling and chopping of timber and stuff on the farm. And one day she was a group. They found some mushrooms, and she shared them with others. And that night she was violently ill. And so when she woke up in the morning for the roll call before they went out to work, she struggled to get there. She knew that if she didn't get there, she'd be put into the ovens. And so she managed to get onto the truck to go out to the farm. And fortunately, this is where providence comes into people's lives. She had to pack tomatoes for the markets. And on instinct, she just felt, if I eat as many tomatoes as I can, the poison will be counteracted, and it was. And so she survived till the end of the war. Then, towards the end of the war, the Germans were moving them from one place to another, ahead of the Russian invasion. And she, with a couple of others, as this long column with only 2 or 3 German guards, was going around a bend in some forest. They pushed off into the woods and hid, and then they got to a farmhouse, and they were hiding in the roof of a barn. And then the Russians arrived, and they thought they would be safe. They came down, and the Russian soldiers decided to rape 2 or 3 of them. And then the next day, a Russian officer arrived, and they complained to him about what had happened. And he said, "Point out the men." And he'd lined them up, and when they were lined in, the girls pointed them, and he just shot them on the spot.
Tough life, huh?
And
wow.
then Charlotte then more or less walked across Germany to try to get home. And she said at one stage, before she was walking, she was on a train of people who were escaping from, or had all been in prisons of one kind or another, and they were starving, and there was a train pulled up beside them, was loaded with American food parcels for the soldiers, and these prisoners broke out and started to raid the parcels, and the Americans just turned their guns on them. I don't know whether they killed them or just shot over their heads, but she said she was more frightened for her life after the Americans arrived than she was during the previous period.
Yeah, well,
at any rate, she managed to get back to her home village. Her father was a doctor, and he was working in this hospital during the war, and one night 2 or 3 blokes from the underground who had been caught and shot but were still alive were brought in, and so this was getting towards the end of the war, just before the Germans were pulling out. So he got onto the underground, and he drugged the coffee of the German guards who were looking after these 2 prisoners. And okay, the underground got them out, but then the next day the head of the SS came in, realised what had been done, and just ordered Charlotte's father to confront him and shot him on the spot.
mm.
And then the next day they pulled out. And I remember Charlotte telling me at one stage she was driving, this was after the council, that she was driving near the Autobahn, and there were a couple of German university students probably hitching a hike. She pulled up to give them a lift. But as soon as they started to talk in German, even though she understood it, it was the anniversary of her father's death, and she just told them to get out of the car. She couldn't handle it.
Mm.
She had saved a lot of lives. Like she and her sister had, or it might have been an aunt, had saved a lot of Jewish lives previously. So in that avenue of the righteous in Jerusalem, there's a tree in honour of her and her.
Is that right? Okay.
Family.
Mm.
So
That's the Habicht couple, yeah.
she was an extraordinary lady. I had a lot of time for her. She was also very close to John Paul II,
Okay.
because her husband had come from Krakow, that part of Poland, and of course he was Archbishop in Krakow. And so even during the council, he'd often have, like, they were still under communist control, but he would often have a meal at their home while he was just an archbishop, and then after he was made pope, he still would ring her regularly.
Okay.
And I remember I hitched her around the world, and this is after the council and everything, and I'd arrived in Freiburg, and I'd rang her, or I rang the family, and she answered the phone, and she said, "Oh, come on round." And I think I may have stayed there for 2 or 3 days. But she was ordering a Twitter. The previous phone call had been from the Pope.
I see.
This is the first time after he'd been elected.
Yeah, right.
And she said, she picked up the phone, and she said, "The Habicht, Charlotte?" And he just said, "Charlotte." And then he talked to her. He was notorious for having a lot of girlfriends, apparently.
Oh, I see.
Had a great affection for her. But yeah, and later, through him, this is all by the by stuff.
Yeah, for sure. But anyway,
But,
it's interesting.
It was through the Pope, through her, knew he needed to have a swimming pool. It was just so much, he was locked into so much there. And so somebody, I think it was the Pope himself, had raised it with her in one of the conversations, and then she asked me to talk to somebody in Paris and then somebody in London about getting the finances so that the Pope could have his swimming pool.
Okay, yeah, I remember the Pope got one of these swimming pools. That's pretty sore back and whatever.
And,
yeah.
and that was the reason. Like
yeah.
but I think they still emptied the pool every time he went to swim in it.
Okay.
Like not the water. I mean, have anybody else swimming.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Yeah. All right.
Yes. So that, and of course, when I had the tuberculosis and I'd been in the sanatorium for about 8 or 9 months, and then I could become an outpatient, but they wouldn't allow me to come back to Australia. But a friend of Keegan's, John Dormer.
I know the name. Yeah, I was going to ask you about him actually. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, John Dormer, I'd met John a few times through Pat down in Rome, and Dormer by this stage had inherited, I think it was Tooth's or Tooheys Brewery, one of the big breweries in Australia, through his family, and he had moved his finances to Fribourg in Switzerland, where he, by paying a certain fee to the local city council, he could have a residence there. This allowed him to pay tax there at a minimum level and not have to pay it in England. But he had this apartment, and so when I had to leave the hospital, Keegan got on to him and said, "You're not using your apartment in Fribourg, let John stay up there." So I stayed in Dormer's apartment for about 3 months, and then taking the train down to Montana Crown, where the...
But what was his role at John Dormer? Because yes, I have come across his name.
He was not a lay auditor. He was always angry, a bit put out that he wasn't. He felt that Keegan hadn't pushed his case well enough. John Dormer, of course, belonged to the aristocracy of England, who were a family that had stayed loyal to the Catholic faith at the time of Henry VIII, and so. But he had entree to a lot of that level of society. At the same time, he had really taken Cardine's vision of things very much to heart and was a very good friend to Keegan. But he did feel entitlement to get, and he didn't get, Pat didn't put his name in to get him into the council.
Did he come to Australia, John Dormer?
Ah, yes, well, he came out here at some stage. He had quite an influence on a few down in Melbourne. He was the priest chaplain down there. Lombard, was his name?
Lombard, yeah.
I think Dormer had a fair influence on him, and also Father. There's a Jesuit.
Maine, Charlie Maine.
No, Charlie Maine was in charge of the seminary. No, at a different. He was chaplain to the university.
Golden, Jerry Golden.
Jerry Golden, yes.
Okay, he was close to Dormer too, was he?
Yeah.
Okay.
And of course, Dormer certainly had an influence all through this on O'Halloran, and so I ended up staying in Dormer's apartment for 3 months.
Okay. Anyway, let's just finish on those other auditors I was going to ask you about. Marie-Louise Monet, did you know her much?
Yes, I met her. She wanted me to stay with her and her brother in Paris. She was a marvellous cook or chef. She provided beautiful meals, but I never ended up staying there. I liked Marie-Louise, but she and her brother was the bloke who started the European Common Market. So,
that's right, Jean Monnet, yeah.
Jean Monnet, and so she was in some of these dinner parties that I was at, and I was not as close to her as I was to Keegan. Segranus.
Yeah, Segranus, yeah.
Now, as I say, he also lived in Fribourg afterwards. I saw him several times after the council, but during the council, the one event that's really stuck in my mind, during the third session of the council, there was to be a vote on the scheme on freedom of conscience. It had been a very hot potato.
Yeah. And
this particular day, I forget the Archbishop who was the Secretary of the Council.
Felici.
I think that's who it was.
Felici was the Secretary General, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Well, he got, I think it was he got up and announced that there would be no vote on the freedom of conscience that session. And the council went into, it was like, the only image I can ever give to it, it's like a beehive when you pull the queen out. The bees go everywhere and they're crazy. Well, the bishops and the cardinals and the lay auditors and all the theologians, there were like 5,000 or 6,000 in that hall, and there were blokes with their fists to the face of others, and like, so even there was the table of, what was about 16 presidents of the council, chairman.
I think 10. Yeah.
10 was it? It was a huge
10 or
row.
12. Yeah.
And there were there were 2 or 3 of them had been consulted, but the others had not been consulted about this, and so they were attacking each other. And where the lay auditors' set of seats was the tribune they were in, was straight
opposite
the president's table, and the secretary's table was over there. And I heard the phone go on the secretary's table, like amid the uproar, and suddenly Felici's face went green, and he put the phone down, and he walked straight past our tribune, looking terribly agitated. I found out later through the Habicht that the phone call was from Paul VI. He was watching everything on Player Circuit TV.
Back in his room.
Other work on his desk. And like, he was right that the Pope stay away so that the discussions could be more free-flowing.